say walking is good for you, and I agree. I've always enjoyed a quiet stroll after dinner. The rhythm of footsteps on an empty street, the creak of old knees keeping pace with the rustling leaves, the comfort of routine. But I remember something my doctor once told me, back when I was 67. He looked over his glasses, gentle but firm, and said, "Frank, walking is wonderful, but don't let it be your only friend." At the time, I smiled politely, not really understanding what he meant. Only later, in the quiet aches of my body and the subtle fading of my strength, did his words begin to echo back to me, louder each year. You see, walking gives you movement but not resilience. I learned that the hard way. There was a fall. Not dramatic, no ambulance or flashing lights. Just me, slipping on a smooth patch of tile near the garden hose. I went down faster than I thought I could. My arms didn't catch me like they used to. My balance, which I'd always taken for granted, had quietly betrayed me. When I sat up, shaken, embarrassed, and sore, I realized something. I had been walking every morning, faithfully, but I hadn't done anything to help my balance. I never trained my reflexes or worked the small muscles around my ankles and core. I just walked, straight lines, familiar routes. And in doing so, I had slowly let go of the agility that once saved me from small accidents. You don't notice those little losses, not at first, but they add up, like dust gathering in a corner, silent and consistent. One day, you try to reach for the jar on the top shelf, and your hand trembles more than you expect. Or you bend down to tie your shoe and realize you're holding your breath just to keep from losing balance. I thought walking would keep me strong, but the truth is, walking became a comfort, not a challenge. And comfort, while lovely, isn't always what the body needs after a certain age. Another thing I noticed slowly, subtly, was that my posture began to stoop. At first, I blamed the weather or long nights in my reading chair. But it wasn't that. My muscles, especially around my shoulders and spine, weren't being asked to do much. Walking didn't stretch them or strengthen them. They just settled into softness, a quiet shrinking. There was a time I carried heavy bags without thinking, helped lift the grandkids without hesitation. But after 65, things don't return to normal after a strain. There's stiffness in the morning, tightness in the hips, and if you only walk, you're not giving your muscles much to hold on to. I began to feel this strange fatigue, not the kind that sleep fixes. It was like a dimming in the corners of my strength, where once there was certainty, there was now hesitation. That's when I realized I wasn't getting weaker because of age alone. I was getting weaker because I wasn't asking enough of my body. And here's something you don't hear enough: muscle, when ignored, forgets you. It doesn't rebel loudly. It just steps back and lets gravity do the rest. One winter, I tried helping a neighbor shovel snow. It was just a few light scoops, but the soreness in my arms lasted for days. Not the good kind. The kind that reminded me, you haven't used us in a while. It embarrassed me quietly. Not because I wanted to be young again, I've made peace with that chapter being over, but because I knew better. I had seen friends before me lose their independence not from dramatic injuries, but from tiny defeats. A misstep, a weak grip, a stumble they couldn't recover from. And here I was, thinking walking alone would keep the wolves at bay. There's something funny about getting older. The routines that once kept you sharp start to feel like hiding places. I walked the same loop every morning. Past the church with the leaning bell tower, down Maple Street where the mailman always waved, and back through the park where the ducks didn't seem to mind my slow pace. Familiarity is comforting, but comfort, when left unchecked, becomes a sort of quiet trap. One morning, I paused by the edge of the pond and realized I was tired. Not just my legs, my spirit. It wasn't depression, not exactly. It was more like a dull ache in the soul. The kind that shows up when you do the same thing over and over, but nothing inside you moves. I stood there, watching the light dance on the water, and I asked myself, when was the last time I did something new? The truth was hard to admit. I had stopped challenging myself. There's a danger in believing that just keeping moving is enough. Movement without intention becomes noise. like pacing in a room but never going anywhere. It reminded me of something my wife used to say before she passed. "Frank, don't confuse motion with growth." And she was right. I had been moving, sure, but I wasn't growing. Not stronger, not steadier, just older. The body has a way of telling you when it's being neglected. For me, it was my balance, like I mentioned before, but also my energy. There were days I'd get back from my walk and feel more drained than when I started. I remember trying to carry a bag of groceries up the stairs. Not a heavy one, just a few cans and some bread. Halfway up, I had to stop and catch my breath. My legs wobbled more than I liked. That moment stayed with me, because I realized something important. Walking had become easy, and what's easy doesn't push you to stay capable. It was time I admitted that if I wanted to keep my independence, truly keep it, I had to do more than stroll past ducks and mailboxes. So I started small. I stood on one foot while brushing my teeth. Felt silly at first. My balance was worse than I thought. But over time, I noticed something. The wobble grew steadier. My ankles felt more alive. My core, that forgotten place below the ribs and above the hips, started to whisper back to me. Then I began doing light push-ups against the wall. Just 10 a day. That's all I could manage without huffing like an old tractor. But I kept at it. I even tried a few squats by holding onto the edge of the kitchen counter. I'll tell you, the first time I stood up from that position without needing help, I smiled like a fool. It wasn't about building muscle like I did in my 20s. No, it was about reclaiming confidence in my own body, knowing it could still answer when I called on it. People think strength fades because of time, but I think more often it fades because we stop inviting it in. We stop asking for it, stop trusting it to come back. If you're still here, listening to me ramble, leave me a little note below. Just tell me, when did you last feel truly strong? Not in the gym, not in front of anyone. I mean quietly strong, like your own body had your back. I'd love to hear about it. Sometimes sharing a small story can give someone else the courage to begin theirs. It wasn't just my legs that felt tired. There were mornings when I'd wake up and feel like I hadn't slept at all. The kind of fatigue that settles behind your eyes, like fog on a windshield that no amount of wiping can clear. I used to think it was age, just part of the deal. But one afternoon, after helping my daughter tend her little garden, I sat down on the porch and realized something odd. I was breathing fast, but shallow. My chest rose, but the air didn't seem to go anywhere. It was like sipping from a straw with a hole in it. No matter how hard I tried, I didn't feel full. I never thought much about breathing before. Who does? It's just there, automatic, like a heartbeat or the creak in the stairs. But in that quiet moment, sitting among lavender and tomato vines, I noticed how different it felt when I slowed down, when I took a breath not from the chest, but from the belly. The kind of breath that rises from deep down, where your worries tend to settle. I placed a hand on my stomach, like I'd once done for my wife when she was carrying our first, and I breathed in slow and wide. It was strange at first, unfamiliar, but then something shifted. My shoulders softened. The tightness in my neck eased. Even my thoughts seemed to find more room. It made me wonder, how many years had I gone without really breathing? The world is fast. Even in retirement, somehow the noise finds you. You scroll through news. You worry about bills. You remember too many funerals and too few phone calls. And your breath, once deep and open, becomes narrow. Careful, like your body is bracing for something, even when nothing is happening. I started practicing those deep breaths every morning. Just 5 minutes. No music, no phone, no fancy cushions. Just me and a window. Some days I'd hum softly as I exhaled. Not because I can sing, heavens no, but because the vibration helped settle my nerves. It reminded me of when I was a boy and my mother would hum while stirring soup. The sound didn't need meaning. It just needed presence. Breathing that way changed more than I expected. I had more energy in the afternoons. I felt less foggy, less anxious. Even my blood pressure, which used to hover just a touch too high, began to settle into calmer territory. People underestimate breath. They chase vitamins and gadgets, diets and trends, but forget the one medicine that's been with them since the very beginning. Walking is good for the legs, but breathing deep, slow, mindful breathing is what keeps the soul from collapsing in on itself. It reconnects things, loosens what grief tightens, clears what age clouds. It's the anchor that reminds you, I'm still here. This moment is still mine. One evening, my grandson was visiting. He's 5, full of questions and peanut butter. He asked why I sometimes sat so still in my chair, eyes closed but not asleep. I told him, I'm talking to my lungs. He giggled like I'd said something magical. And maybe I had, because after 65, you start to realize that listening to your body isn't a luxury. It's a responsibility. And some parts of us, like the breath, speak only when we slow down enough to hear. There was a day, not too long after my 72nd birthday, when I tried to tie my shoe and couldn't quite reach it. Not because I was dizzy, not because of pain, but because something in me had stiffened. It was a quiet realization. No drama, no gasps. Just me, staring at my shoe like it was a riddle I couldn't solve. I remember sitting back in the chair and letting out a long breath. It wasn't sadness. It was more like a soft acknowledgement. I can't move the way I used to, and I didn't even notice it happening. That's the trouble with stiffness, it doesn't knock loudly. It seeps in. One day you twist to reach the back seat and feel a pull in your ribs. The next, your neck won't quite turn far enough to check for traffic. You tell yourself it's the weather, or sleep, or just a bad day. But the truth is, it's a slow fading. A fading that walking alone can't stop. Walking keeps your feet in motion, yes, but it doesn't ask your hips to stretch, or your spine to twist, or your shoulders to open. It doesn't teach your body to bend and bow and spiral like it used to when you were dancing in kitchens or chasing little ones through the grass. I missed that kind of movement, the kind that feels like poetry in the bones. So I started with something simple, circles. Small ones with my wrists and ankles before bed. Then bigger ones, swinging my arms, turning my neck gently from side to side while watching the birds outside. I found an old foam roller my daughter left behind years ago, still wrapped in plastic. It looked like a strange blue log. At first, I had no idea what to do with it. But one evening, I watched a video. A kind woman with a soothing voice showing how to roll the back gently. So I tried it, slowly, cautiously. And you know what surprised me the most? It wasn't the stretch. It was the sound. My back made a quiet little pop. Not painful, just releasing. Like a window being opened in a room that hadn't been aired out in years. Stretching became less of a task and more of a ritual. Each morning, I reached up toward the ceiling, even if I couldn't touch it. I bent forward, just far enough to feel something awaken in my spine. Some days, I laid on the floor and let my legs fall gently from side to side, like a willow swaying. My body remembered. It didn't bounce back like a child's, but it remembered the joy of space, of movement that isn't hurried, of joints that breathe. You don't need to be flexible like the young to move with grace. You just need to invite your body into movement it hasn't seen in a while. And do it kindly. There's an intimacy that grows when you care for your own limbs like something fragile but beloved. When you touch your knee, not in frustration, but in gratitude. When you forgive your back for being slow to wake up. When you stretch not to improve but to remember. I think that's what so many forget. That growing older isn't about loss. It's about listening. And sometimes your body whispers, I don't need to run. I just want to feel open again. I'm 80 now. Some mornings I wake up and feel the weight of all those years resting quietly on my joints, like dew clinging to an old window pane. Other mornings, I feel light as wind, as if I've already let go of everything that used to keep me heavy. But no matter the day, there's a small ritual I return to. I sit by the window, hands around a warm cup, and I ask myself, what do I still want to feel today? Not accomplish, not prove, just feel. Because at this stage, it's not about chasing life. It's about noticing it. And I've noticed over these slow, reflective years that walking alone, while gentle and familiar, can sometimes become a way of avoiding the deeper care our bodies crave. Balance slips away if you don't speak its language. Strength fades if you don't call its name. Flexibility, breath, resilience. They all sit quietly in the corner, waiting for you to remember them. I used to think aging was about holding on, gripping tight to what you used to do, who you used to be. But now I know better. It's about loosening, softening, listening. It's about walking with your body, not just on your feet. I've fallen before, not just physically but emotionally. Moments when I doubted my usefulness, when the mirror felt unfamiliar, when the quiet in the house grew too loud. And in those moments, I found that it wasn't grand gestures that lifted me. Not marathons or machines, but the small, faithful practices. Standing on one leg while brushing my teeth. Breathing from my belly, like I meant it. Stretching in the doorway while the kettle boiled. Lifting soup cans with slow, grateful intention. These aren't workouts. They're offerings. Little acts of care, of remembrance. Because the body, even in its oldest chapters, is still listening. It still wants to be trusted. And maybe that's the deepest truth of all. It's not about adding years to your life, but returning life to your years. So to you, wherever you are on your path, whether 65, 75, or nearing 80 like me, don't wait for a wake-up call in the form of a fall or a hospital visit. Don't assume walking is enough just because it once was. Listen a little deeper, move a little wider, breathe a little slower, and treat your aging body like an old friend you've grown apart from, someone you're learning to love again. And if you'd like to return here from time to time, you know where to find me. This space doesn't go anywhere. We'll sit by the window together, quietly, not walking fast but walking well.